Yo, what's checking, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of the Orange Bloods Texas Football Channel. I'm Geoff Ketchum. That is the splendidly lovely Anwar Richardson. It's the backdrop, Anwar. The new color on the walls just has me wanting to say pretty things about you, which is good because there hasn't been a lot of pretty things being said about the Texas football program on the heels of back-to-back losses. Look, do us a solid. Smash that like button. Let us know that you like what we're doing. We appreciate it. Subscribe to the channel. We are creeping up on 7,500 on our path to 10,000 and beyond. And look, man, find that little bell, click on it, and then you can get notifications every time we've got a video coming out. We will have baseball and basketball and soccer. And in addition to all of our football stuff, it will be a busy week on the channel. Even though there's a bye week, the show must go on. Onward today, we are talking about positives. We're going to just focus on things in the final 5 weeks of this season that Texas fans, I think, can look towards and feel good about. Like, why are we watching this team? Why are we investing in watching these videos and any kind of content? You know, pick us up and let us know why that matters. That's our task today. And I'll let you kick us off, but there's one that to me is most obvious. And to me, it might be the thing that the whole season needs to be about the rest of the way.
Oh, well then, I mean, you can't tease like that and then kick it to me. So I mean,
that was kind of shitty, wasn't it? I got this awesome thing.
I got something that's amazing, but why don't you go first?
Well, no. I thought it was so obvious that I thought I was putting it on a tee for you. It's BIjan going for the Heisman.
Okay, yeah.
Like, I know that his team has 3 losses. I know that he's not the favorite at this point, and it would take some doing to, I think, turn that around. But if you talk about one thing that could turn this season around in the way that it's remembered, the way that recruits look at the way this whole thing in 2021 has gone down, I think BIjan Robinson is on target to have a really special season. And if they want to make it extra special, if they want to make sure that when they get inside the red zone and like they get down to the 3-yard line, no cute little passes, let's pile on the stats. He has everybody nationally loves the guy.
Yes.
I think for the rest of the season, you go out of your way, if nothing else, to get BIjan Robinson in New York. At the very least, get him in New York as a finalist for the Heisman, and see what you can do with this special talent and make that a season to remember. It's gotten lost over the course of the last 2 weeks because of the losses, but this guy is incredible, Anwar. Yeah. And every week he's doing something that deserves praise and attention. And I think in the final 5 weeks of the season, if anything is must-see TV, it's BIjan. And I think they've got to do now the thing that they really didn't want to do. They gotta go all in on BIjan. Like,
yeah.
Now's not the time to start putting other running backs into the game. Just let him get let him help you win games and see how far you can take that storyline in a year when the Heisman is begging for someone to try and win it. Try and win it.
Yeah, it's interesting, Ketch. When you were talking, so I decided to look it up, and you are right when you say it kind of gets lost in the conversation of, well, Oklahoma happened, Oklahoma State happened. BIjan is the top running back in the Big 12. Like he is the number 1 guy, 146 carries, 924 yards, 10 touchdowns. So now I look to see, okay, well, where's that at nationally, Ketch? He's third.
Yes.
He's third in the country, behind Kenneth Walker III from Michigan State, Sean Tucker from Syracuse. BIjan is third. And here's the thing, Kenneth Walker III from Michigan State is at 997. Sean Tucker is at 948, and BIjan's at 924. So to your point, it's funny you say we don't talk about it enough. This guy is freaking good. This guy's freaking special. And with 5 games remaining, I mean, and he's already got close to 1,000 through 7 games. So you're still looking, I'm spitballing math on here, but a 1,500-yard rusher, 1,600-yard rusher, something to that effect, Ketch.
And absolutely. And that, I think, is if he's hitting his current average. If he does the rest of the season, like against Kansas, go for 300. You know what I mean? Like, I think that the thing is, the thing that got Matt Brown over the top in 1998 in recruiting, he won at Nebraska when Nebraska was #1 in the country and hadn't lost a home game in like a bazillion years. So they had that moment. But Ricky Williams going to the Heisman that year is the reason they got Chris Sims. He's the reason they signed Corey Redding, both of whom were USA Today Offense and Defensive Players of the Year. It made a big difference. And I think if you're Sark and you've got other questions about your program at this point, being able to have BIjan in New York at a minimum this year, it says they're not wasting BIjan Robinson. And one of the concerns I have with BIjan, if Texas messes around and goes 7-5 this year, that's not a great advertisement for 5-star players to say, if I go to Texas, 2 of my first 3 years are going to be on a 7-5 team and a 7-3 team that got a coach fired. Like, why? That's not what Arch Manning needs to see with regards to what will happen with my high-level talent if I go to Texas. But if BIjan gets to New York and BIjan's a legitimate Heisman candidate, then you don't ever have to worry about saying, did we do enough? Did we get enough out of this guy? The answer to that question would be absolutely yes. And in a year where there aren't any real dominant teams with dominant quarterbacks, it's kind of hard right now to even look across the country and say that this guy will definitely be a finalist. That doesn't exist this year. I mean, maybe Bryce Young at Alabama, right? Like there's I guess like it is such a strange year. As a guy who used to run a website called Heisman.com, it is strange for me to think that we are almost at Halloween and there aren't front runners that have lost the Heisman because they had big games. You know what I mean? Like usually during the course of a season, it feels like there's a front runner and then either he has a big game or doesn't have a big game. And then we go to the next guy and then we go to the next guy. And eventually somebody will take the lead and kind of start to emerge as a front runner. It just hasn't happened this year. So of all of the things that Texas can do the rest of the way, other than compete for the conference championship, which is not in their control, they cannot control that. Then the one thing I think they can control is over the course of, let's say, the next 3 weeks, Bijan's got to be huge in Waco. Bijan's got to be huge in Ames. And if they can win those games and he has big games, I think because he's kind of like, I'd have to look at the Heisman odds. He's got like the 5th best odds or something like that. Like this isn't crazy talk. He's in a position where I think he could make a legitimate run into the top 3 or top 4, but they have to make that, I think, behind the scenes a little bit of a focus. Bijan's going to get his a lot. And you know what? That's not a bad thing for this team. It's not bad. You know what? If he has a couple 30 carry games, that means the running game is working because he can't get to 30 if they're going 3 and out on every drive.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. While you're talking, let me just look up something real quick. I know this makes for a horrible
the old internet search in the middle of the
video. in the middle. But so I'm looking up Russian defenses here, right? And so they face Baylor, who is ranked 6th in the Big 12 as far as rushing defense is concerned. Then they go on the road versus Iowa State, which is ranked 1st currently in the Big 12. You've got to help me. I think they back at home versus Kansas, if I'm correct.
Correct.
Does that sound about right, Ketch?
Yeah.
And then Kansas is 10th. So that's obviously a big opportunity there. They would play West Virginia on the road, and West Virginia is ranked 3rd, and then close off against K-State, which is ranked 5th. So essentially, K-State, Baylor, and Kansas provide are 5th or lower right now in rushing defense. So the opportunities for big games, where even if we has a human game versus an Iowa State, right? And human for BIjan what he had over 100 versus Oklahoma. We barely talked about it, right? And I think what did he have versus Oklahoma State? It was, I think he had also over 100 versus Oklahoma State. That's what I probably mean. I meant
he's just not having the big second halves.
Yeah.
That unless you have the spectacular highlight, he has, and look, it's a big part of the conversation about the next few weeks, what has to happen. Texas can't get overwhelmed at the line of scrimmage to the point where it looks like Bijan's just fighting a jailbreak. I mean, and if it's going to be like that, the Texas coaching staff has to do a better job of getting the ball out into space, throw him the ball more. I mean, I'm sorry. I will not criticize. If they threw a swing pass to BIjan Robinson 5 times in a game and it lost -5 yards every play, I would not be like, well, they just got to stop running that play. I'd be like, I would at least say, good idea. I'm not going to criticize them for getting ways to involve BIjan Robinson with the football in unconventional ways. So we know they'll line him up at wide receiver, and we know that he can catch the football. And I think that's been one thing this offense hasn't done enough of, is use Bijan in that capacity. You can't tell me that just, if they're running wheel routes a half dozen times a game and the teams that they're playing are covering those wheel routes, first of all, maybe we should be spotlighting that. Who's this linebacker for the other teams that every time BIjan Robinson gets in one-on-one situation is running step for step with the guy that's being compared to Reggie Bush? That guy needs to be playing on Sundays. Like, who's his hype man? Like, so I don't think they're doing with Bijan as much as they can, which is kind of a sin. I mean, if it was before the Oklahoma game, we would be saying they're saving it for Oklahoma, that they're gonna break it out in that game. Well, they didn't, and they still really haven't. And now we are 7 games into the season, and maybe it's going to be one of those things that I call for every week. But in the name of getting the ball to your best player, especially when you're struggling running the football, I mean, that's the thing. And that would be the biggest criticism I think I would have of Steve Sarkisian, is this idea that they've kind of, in the second half of games the last 2 weeks, run their heads into the wall with defenses are doing one thing that's stopping them in their tracks, and they haven't had that thing that is a curveball of sorts that's different than what they've previously been doing in the first half. And it's something that I think Sarkisian and this offense needs to figure out a way to do. And if the answer doesn't include BIjan Robinson's name, then you're doing it wrong, because he's special, and they just can't do enough of that.
I've got 2 more guys.
Give it to me.
The first one, and again, it's in our era of positivity here, Ketch. Did you know that DEMARVION OVERSHOWN is 3rd in the Big 12 in tackles?
I did know that. He's having a very good season.
Quietly. And again, we focus in a little bit on what's not happening, Ketch, with the defense and the struggles that are there. But DEMARVION is tied for 2nd with 56 tackles. Malcolm Rodriguez leads the Big 12 with 61. But DEMARVION right now, 56 tackles, averaging 8 tackles per game. So if you're looking for some positivity and things that you say, okay, what's working well, DEMARVION is getting to the ball. Like we all know right now, he's in a concussion protocol, and Texas doesn't have a game this week. So that gives him some time to kind of recover and hopefully get right, starting next week. But yeah, DeMarvion quietly is, is interesting. Catch, you and I think were a little bit on the DeMarvion OVERSHOWN bandwagon a little bit sooner than a lot of people. And a lot of it's because we heard, and he's that converted safety that goes into that linebacker position. So he's got that speed, a little bit undersized for the position, but is able to, get east-west very fast. And he has that kind of skill, that has that kind of ability. And man, I mean, that first quarter, if Texas could just bottle the first quarter of every game and either walk off or figure out how to do that for 4 quarters, this is a hell of a team. Because that first quarter versus Oklahoma State, I'm like, golly, this is the second coming of whatever, Ray Lewis or Buckus, or I mean, it was amazing, how it was. And so obviously it tapers down just a little bit, and then he gets hurt, and so that obviously plays effect. But DeMarvion OVERSHOWN, if you're a Texas fan, that's a reason for optimism. That's a guy you look at, Ketch, and say that should be an all Big 12 guy at the end of the season. That's a guy that has the opportunity to go in the NFL after the season. You would say all the positives, I think, as relates to DeMarvion.
DeMarvion's going to the NFL after this season, and I think that's going to be the case whether or not he had an average season or a very good season. So it warms my heart that he's creating some NFL buzz. I know I saw a reporter at another network last week mention that OVERSHOWN's name was a name that NFL draft scouts were talking about. Like, he's helped himself this year. And if he doesn't get hurt against Oklahoma State, he actually may lead the Big 12 in tackles.
Yeah.
He missed the entire second half and a good chunk of the first. So that's probably 4 or 5. And he's trailing in tackles by 4 or 5. So, he'd probably be right at the top of that list. You got another one? Because I have 3.
Okay.
And the first one I was going to mention was actually not DeMarvion. So I'm curious when you said you had 2.
I got 2 more. So I got 1 more.
Okay.
And I mean, just because his game was quiet against Oklahoma State, I still don't think we can sleep on Xavier Worthy.
Yeah.
Catch, he's still number 2 in the Big 12 when it comes to receiving yards, right? Yeah. He's top 50 in the nation still as a freshman. So you still got to understand that there's still some room and growth and development that's going to be there. So there's a lot of firsts that he's experiencing. But 29 yards, 542, 6 TDs. I mean, and again, this last game was a little bit different because there was no Jordan Whittington there, and so it was just a little bit different to have someone to take some pressure off of him, because obviously the Oklahoma State said, all right, that's the guy we're going to shut down. They needed someone else to step up from a receiving standpoint and didn't necessarily get that. But Xavier Worthy is still that guy. Like, he's still that dude, and he's still that guy that we saw at Oklahoma that can go bonkers at any moment. They're not going to face another defense, I believe, that's as good as Oklahoma State. I still think there's a lot of opportunity. I mean, he's at 6 TDs, Catch. I think hitting 10 is very achievable, which it would be incredible for a freshman. And getting to 1,000 yards, I don't know if we can get there, but I think he'll come close at the very least. Like, I could definitely see at least 900.
Well, they got 6 games left because they're going to play in a bowl game.
Well, yeah. So if we're going bold, then obviously yes. Then he'll go over 1,000. If he stays healthy, over 1,000, absolutely.
Yeah, I didn't mention the extra game with BIjan because we were talking about the Heisman. So that postseason game towards his numbers won't really matter, other than to say he has a chance to have a special season. And with that extra game, man, does it suddenly, when it's all said and done, are we talking 1,800 yards? Does he heat up and then it's 1,900, and then you come back next year and it's 2,000 yards, get to New York? Is amazing. He's one of the faces of college football next year.
Oh, yeah.
If he finishes with that type of a season. Xavier has a chance to have the best freshman. He already is. He's having the best freshman season that any receiver at Texas has ever had. So it's about how high can he take that? Because the next time when Evan Stewart shows up, we will not have to look into the record book to know, well, the new standard has been set.
Yeah.
And I think the thing that Xavier has done that, to his credit, is if you ask the question of who's the best freshman season in school history prior to this season, you do a little bit of, oh, well, this guy had this many catches, but this guy had this many yards, and Roy Williams, it's not an obvious, like, that guy that year.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when this thing's over with, he gets to 1,000, he gets to 10 touchdowns. Those are markers that no freshman at Texas has ever done before.
Hell,
so
seniors haven't done that in Texas before, let
What's
alone
that?
fresh. There's been seniors who haven't done that, let alone freshmen.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I got my two guys. Do you have any more? We'll go.
No, I'm gonna go with those. I'm gonna see what you say.
Well, you're gonna love my last one. Okay.
I think I know where your last one's gonna be. I'm gonna write it down.
Okay. You're gonna love my last one, but my first one is Alfred Collins.
Oh.
We've talked about him during the offseason. This is a little bit different versus the context of the first three guys. Alfred Collins is a 5-star level talent that we've been waiting for the light switch to come on, because we've all believed, like, this guy can be a first or second round pick in the NFL in a couple of years if he hits his ceiling. It feels like he's starting to spread his wings a little bit. And what more than the other guys that we've mentioned, in the final 5 games of a season, he has a chance to redefine. We already think those other guys are a certain kind of thing. He's on the ascension. How far he ascends in these final 5 games goes a long way towards on the defense needs some foundation pieces going into next season. They'll lose Overshown. They'll lose Jamison. They'll lose BJ Foster. They're going to lose. They're going to, Josh Thompson, they got some guys, Darius Dunn. Like, there's a lot. The defense losing some dudes when this season is over with. And to be able to point to him and say, no doubt about it, NFL talent, that's who they need to, I think, kind of start to come up a little bit. And he is. And I think he's a guy you'd want to watch. He's a reason to tune in. All right, you ready for number 5?
I'm ready. I'm gonna see. I'm curious. Go for it.
I want you to hold up your sign.
Can you see it?
You're right, Cameron Dicker. I can't believe we're having this conversation, but I wrote about it in my 10 thoughts from the weekend. He is having a better season punting right now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not something you want, right? Like, nobody wants to have the best punter. But Cameron Dicker is averaging more yards per kick by a lot, actually, and by almost 2 yards, and is averaging more kicks inside the 20 on percentage of kicks than Michael Dixon did in any year he was ever on campus at Texas.
Wow.
And we don't think of Cameron Dicker anywhere near the level of Michael Dixon. But the stats are the stats. And if there was any other position where we were like, well, he's got more yards, he's got more touchdowns than this guy, we would at least have to have the conversation of, is he? And Cameron Dicker, ironically, is not leading the Big 12 in punting right now. I think Oklahoma's punter is a little bit better, like in yards per kick. But in using Michael Dixon as the bar, I am now at a point after this weekend where after every week, I will make sure that I check Cameron Dicker's stats after games, because I want to know if he can maintain it. If at the end of the year, Cameron Dicker finishes the season anywhere close to Michael Dixon, and he is right. I mean, he's ahead of that. Like, I'll give Cameron Dicker one hell of an attaboy, because he's punting by accident. This happened last year because of an injury. And then they put him back there, and by the end of the year, both you and I were like, they need to keep that dude back there. Like, we thought that was going to potentially be a problem, and instead it was like, oh, keep him there. I almost wanted him to play punter more than place kicker. It was like, find somebody that can take the place kicking duties away from him and let him punt. He's turning himself into an NFL player right now, Anwar. Like, guys that he can punt. He could potentially, if an NFL team really wanted, at worst, he's working his way into, I think, in a position where he can punt. And if you've got a punter that can make him from 50, if your kicker gets hurt, that gives him even more added value. Like, starting kicker goes down and you're good, because he might not be quite NFL starter level kicker, but he can make them from anywhere confidently. He's just not the most consistent guy in the world, but I couldn't be more impressed with what he's done this season. And yes, putting his ass in the top 5. Can't believe I'm doing it, but the numbers are the numbers.
You know, when you say like Dixon, I mean, people may forget this guy was an MVP of a bowl game. Like, when is the last time you had a punter who was an MVP of a bowl game? Like, that's how good Dixon was. That he, to the point where he was a fifth round pick by Seattle, and they loved him. I mean, they could not stop praising him and what he was able to do and what he was able to accomplish. So, and look, in Ketch, you know, the NFL, the one thing these coaches don't want to do, they don't want to worry about punters and kickers. Like, that on their importance level, that is such an afterthought. Even in the NFL, those guys stay off in the corner and do their own thing. And they just want those guys to come in, do it, and then get the heck out. They don't want to think about too many things. So what he's able to do right now, Dicker, is by showing that versatility to a team that says, hey, you need a kicker, I got you. You need a punter, I got you. That will go a long way when it comes to your NFL draft stock as far as being valuable, because you can do multiple things. And God forbid, so, you know, there's a team
and he can kick off.
Yes. So, I mean, he's good. He's very good at what he does. To your point, it was by accident. Yeah, Dicker has emerged into, because you know what? After the OU thing and that kick, there was some inconsistencies, you know, from Dicker. There were some inconsistencies before that kick, and there was still some inconsistencies after that. But he seemingly has worked on his craft. He seemingly has gotten better, someone that they can rely on. And he's a guy that's gone, you know, right, Ketch, after this season as well. So, man, when you started listing off the guys that Texas is losing, I started thinking, oh God, what kind of videos are we going to be doing next year? So this is one of those, man, Sarkisian, your window needs to be right now. You're like, you've got to capitalize on these next 5 games, because when you start thinking about the potential R word, in which could be rebuilding next year, that's going to be.
Well, they're rebuilding right now. Like, you and I have had this argument before. Nobody wants to say the R word. Like, rebuild. Nobody got time for a rebuild, but they're 4-3. They're 4-3 and screaming for, we got to have better players on the offensive line. We need difference makers on defense. We got to get somebody who can rush the passer. Like, they are, whether they like it or not, in the middle of a rebuild. They will lose on the defensive side of the ball a lot of pieces. I mean, we haven't even mentioned Keandre Coburn, and he hasn't had a big season, but that's a guy they took to Big 12 media days because they expected that he was going to be one of their most important players. So, yeah, man, they got to, you know, and, you know, they still lose Ray Thornton. That's another starter. Yeah. And they don't have obvious replacements for him because Ovie Ogofu's playing strong side linebacker. And when they play 3 linebackers on the field a lot, they have to have both of those 2 guys on the field together because they don't really have anybody else behind those 2 guys. You know, yeah, they're in a rebuild. And Dicker's my guy, because I can't stress this enough. I don't feel like we see this happen in the NFL very often. He's good enough to go into the NFL as a training camp guy, as a kicker. Like, not as a punter, but as a kicker. I don't know that I believe he'd make an NFL team as a place kicker, but he could. He's turning into an NFL punter. Like, that could get drafted. I mean, it's not crazy to think that he could be a late round guy if he's averaging nearly 50 yards a punt and can place kick and can kick off, because his kickoffs don't get talked about enough. When Texas needs a touchback, he's got it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And very rarely does Texas actually have kicks returned against them. You know, there are a lot of games where he boots them all out of the end zone. So as much value as we place on place kicker, and, you know, it's like, did he make the field goal? If not, get him out of there. His overall toolbox right now, other than Dixon and Tucker, he's probably the best overall guy that I've seen Texas have in the last 25 years. So,
yeah. No, I mean, there's been 31 touchbacks, you know, for his kicks this season. So
that's 4 a game, 5 a game.
Yeah, and that's the Baylor kicker's got 40, but he's at 31 right now. And again, that's of course we're going off of touchbacks. This doesn't have anything to do when they're saying angle it here, we want you to do it here, so on and so forth. So, but we know the ability is there. If they just say just get it through the end zone and put him on in 25, then he'll do it.
I mean, there are NFL teams that'll have a whole position dedicated to a dude that can kick the ball out of the back of the end zone. All right. Well, look, for myself and Anwar Richardson, because I feel like we talked about our 5 areas of the team, 5 players to keep you 100% interested and excited for the rest of the season. Like the button. Let us know in the comments section if we've left anybody out. We're going to have a video later in the week, tomorrow, as a matter of fact, that will be grades for each position on the team so far, kind of at the midway point of the season, just over the midway point of the season going into the bye week. I wonder if when we do those grades, we'll come across anything that makes us regret that we didn't include somebody from today. But that's not for today. That's for tomorrow. It's a baby tease. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. We'll do this again tomorrow. You guys take care of each other. Later.